Hey, Professor Hitch here, and today I want to talk to you about Rogerian Argument, aka how to win arguments and make friends. Let's get started. So what is a Rogerian argument? Well, typically we think of winners and losers when we think of arguments. We think of my position and everybody else in the world who's wrong. And when you think about arguing in that way, maybe for a moment recall something you wrote in high school or in college. You have to admit that can be a very alienating process. You are walking up to somebody who disagrees with you and you're saying, nope, you're wrong, here's why. Realistically, practically, you may not actually be winning very many of those arguments. And Rogerian argument is the answer to that. It is a kind of argument that works towards consensus. Basically, instead of I'm right, you're wrong, it's you're right, but I'm also right, and maybe if we work together, we can be super duper right. So what's its history? Well, it's based on Carl Rogers' work in psychology. Rogerian argument begins by assuming that a willing writer can find a middle or common ground with a willing reader. Very cool idea. The first step to a Rogerian argument is that the writer has to present the problem, typically pointing out how both the writer and reader are affected by this problem. So for example, if you are arguing about lowering or raising the drinking age, then you would have an introduction that was simply about drinking in general and how there is an issue of what age people should be drinking at. Rather than presenting an issue that divides the reader and writer, or a thesis statement that demands agreement, a Rogerian argument does not begin with the writer's position at all, just this common problem the writer and the audience both share. Next, the writer describes as fairly as possible, in language as neutral as possible, the reader's perceived point of view on the problem. You are, in fact, not going to start with your opinions. You're not going to start with your ideas. The first thing you have to do is prove you understand the reader's opinions and ideas. Now, this can be a challenging thing to do. It is absolutely a step away from how you normally structure essays. It's going to feel very weird to do this. But the writer really needs to acknowledge the circumstances and context of the reader's position in order to show the writer's commitment to the reader. If you're trying to build consensus, if you're trying to work together with your reader, you can't do that by starting with a me first mentality. Talking about your opinions will come in the third step. The next main chunk of the Rogerian argument, that is when the writer presents fairly and accurately his own perspective or position on the problem. This segment depends again on neutral language, but keep in mind, this is also where you need to make your point. So the language here can be like a touch stronger. Now keep in mind, this second step and this third step don't just represent single paragraphs. What I'm talking about is whole chunks of an essay. So you'll have an introduction. You may have one paragraph, you may have 2, 3, 4 paragraphs that are all the other side, and then you'll have just as many on your side. Quick pro tip, if you are writing a Rogerian argument, you want to try to keep the length of the second step and the third step about equal. If you give too much time to the reader's point of view, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot. No one's going to believe you. Everyone's going to say, well, he agrees with the reader, that we're done. But if you give too much time to your side in step 3, it's going to start to feel very combative, and it's going to sound maybe like a Tolman model argument. Now, the final step. The Rogerian essay closes not by asking the readers to give up their own position on the problem, but by showing how the reader would benefit from moving towards the writer's position. In other words, you want to create a conclusion where the writer and the reader benefit by working together. Another way of thinking about it is, you, the reader, are right, but you could be more right if you simply agreed with my position. I could help you out. And that is how the persuasion of a Rogerian argument is done. Final thoughts. Rogerian approaches are particularly useful for emotionally charged and highly divisive issues. The Rogerian approach typically downplays emotion in favor of logic and the rational, so that people of good will find solutions to common problems. But no argument, Rogerian or otherwise, will succeed unless the writer understands the reader. The most important takeaway of a Rogerian argument and of this lecture today is that Rogerian arguments are especially dependent on audience analysis. You must know who is going to be reading your Rogerian argument in order to make an effective one. If you are assigned a Rogerian argument in class, make sure to ask as many questions as possible to your instructor about who your audience is supposed to be. Okay, that's all for now. I hope you found this helpful.